This is the untold story of the making of the modern world. We follow the flow of civilization from the Middle East, an extraordinary place that is home to the founding cultures of history, a vital link between the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe, an economic, scientific, and cultural birthplace of the world. A fresh perspective, charting the spread of civilization across the globe, from the dawn of mankind and the first cities and empires, to the belief in one God. It will be an epic journey of discovery, where East meets West. For 11,000 years, the Middle East led the West in culture and science. From the very first written language, to developments in astronomy, optics, and architecture, and from advances in military technology to academia. But in 1299, the Middle East founded its most powerful empire yet. The arrival of the Ottomans marked the end of a millennium of Christian Byzantine rule and the beginnings of a new world order. This dynamic new dynasty would rapidly evolve into a sophisticated Renaissance superpower that in the West would inspire both fear and fascination. 800 years ago, the Islamic world was fractured. The Mongols had stormed across. Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, was a patchwork of beyliks, small states run by different family regimes.
And today, you get a feeling for the permanency of this dynasty, and that he might be well advised to marry Edebali's daughter, who would help that foundation myth become reality.
The roots of the tree symbolize the foundation of a great empire, and the branches represent its ambition to grow and expand. Osman's dream encapsulates the Ottoman desire to build a capital from which they can conquer the world. By the 14th century, the Ottomans were dominating Anatolia, and they built permanent foundations here in Bursa.
It's really hard to overstress the importance of Bursa. This is where the Ottoman Empire really begins. Sometimes called caravanserais, one of which is here the Koza Han, and then in the center, now full of trees, it would have been open, and merchants would actually bring their camel caravans of goods into a particular Han. In the case of this one, it was Yuja.
The Ottomans used the revenue from trade to build in style. Edirne was the empire's second capital, and from here, they planned their biggest conquest yet. After centuries of expansion across Anatolia and most of the Balkans, in 1450, Mehmet II.
Defenders along this wall to lose heart. That really is the turning point. The Ottomans get a great hold on the wall, dam is burst, and they plunge into the city.
Triumphant, Mehmet Sophia, meaning the Church of Holy Wisdom. An altar used to stand. He built a mihrab, pointing toward Mecca. Walking through the Hagia Sophia's corridors today is like walking back in time. The worn flagstones and dense brickwork date back over 1,500 years. Today, there are still visible remains of the Hagia Sophia's lustrous mosaics, an unmistakable symbol of its Christian origins. In laying claim to this magnificent structure, Mehmet could assert the power and authority and madrasas. Once Istanbul was secured, Mehmet set about strengthening his empire through commerce, and he put Istanbul at the heart of his trade. Mehmet took advantage of the strategic position of his new capital by utilizing the old Byzantine trading links, and he encouraged international traders of Renaissance Europe to return. Under the leadership of Mehmet II, the empire was to enter its fastest growing phase yet. During the 15th century, the Ottomans moved eastward, taking over Turkic beyliks and the last areas of Byzantine resistance, leading to their complete domination of Anatolia. And they also moved north, deeper into Europe, taking Serbia, Greece, Romania, and the Crimea. But this flourishing empire was closely regulated and administered from a central point, Istanbul. So to consolidate his newfound power, Mehmet began building a new Ottoman palace. It was named Topkapi, extending all the way down to the Bosphorus shore. Over centuries of Ottoman rule, the Topkapi complex became the byword for opulence, as later sultans enhanced its elaborate ornate chambers and pavilions. Topkapi Palace.
After taking Constantinople, this is where Mehmet pulled his new empire together.
At Topkapi Palace, he created a sophisticated machine for government. Taking advantage of genealogy, those from the Balkans to Anatolia were just as likely to succeed in the Sultan's regime.
The ones who did very well would be...
The Ottoman bureaucracy would meet at the Imperial Council.
This is really the seat of Ottoman government. Here is where the major decisions taken by the Sultanate were discussed and decided.
Over 400 years ago, the head of the Chancery, the leading judges and the ministers of the Treasury would have gathered in this room, led by the Sultan's most powerful official, his Grand Vizier. Here, Sultan Mehmet II issued the first Ottoman imperial law code. Delegates, princes, and diplomats from the West and the East were received in this room by the Ottomans. Under the millet system, minority communities had comparative social and religious freedom, so long as they kept to the rules and paid their taxes. With its mix of central regulation and comparative religious and social freedom, the Ottoman system allowed trade to develop within the empire. But it also attracted merchants from outside the empire. In Renaissance Europe, there was a growing demand for exotic Ottoman products. In fact, Italian city-states like Venice were entirely dependent on trade in Ottoman dominions. They relied on the Ottomans for luxuries like spices, leather, and textiles.
From the sale of that, they bought raw silk, which in turn they exported back to Italy. We have records from an Italian merchant, Francesco de Meringhi, who relates how he sold and made 1%, 1.5% on these sales. So, I mean, it was clearly a very complex market economy, even at the beginning of the 15th century.
Over the next century, the Ottoman dynasty cast its shadow further and further around the world. And at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, his army forged new frontiers into Hungary. Wealth and potency seemed unaffected. One priceless object.
Burma gibi ya da Hindistan gibi yerlerden geliyor. Firuze İran'ın Firuz kentinden geliyor. Türkçe'de onun için Firuze. Ama batıda turkuaz yani Türk mavisi olarak anılır.
In the maturity of his reign, at the age of 54, Suleiman had reached the zenith of his powers. Now he wanted to leave a lasting and majestic impression upon Istanbul, a symbol of his reign for all the world to see. And to help him, he relied on a well-established genius. His name was Sinan. The chief architect of the empire for 50 years, Sinan had designed and supervised over 400 buildings, from Damascus to the capital. Now Suleiman commissioned Sinan to build the tallest, most extensive complex in the history of the capital, the Süleymaniye Mosque. It is the ultimate expression of the power of the Ottoman state. Even today, its command of the city is breathtaking. As well as a mosque, Sinan designed 4 colleges here, a soup kitchen, a hammam, a caravanserai, and a hospital, as well as the tomb that would be Sultan Suleiman's final resting place. Impressive examples of Sinan's work can still be seen across the country. Sinan's design for the mosque in the city of Edirne perfectly illustrates his skill as an architect. The conformity of intricate geometric shapes was the culmination of Sinan's lifelong effort to achieve a unified space, capturing in stone the ordered Ottoman view of the world. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent is seen as the golden age of Ottoman power and expansion. But in the following centuries, the empire was challenged when a new world order began to emerge, with its center far to the west of Istanbul.
If you look at the 18th century, you already have a sense of a society that is changing. The Mediterranean is being marginalized. That is true of the Ottomans. It's also true of Venice. It's also true of the Spaniards. What is rising is the Atlantic economies. It's the Dutch, the English, to a certain extent the French. So the world is changing. The balance of the world is changing. And in that new world, the Ottomans feel they no longer have a hold on modernity, on what is happening.
In order to try and keep up with the growing power of the West, the Ottoman Sultanate moved away from the dilapidated Topkapi Palace to a new seat of power, Dolmabahce Palace. Completed in 1856, it's the ultimate Rococo monument, resembling the chateaux of France. Dolmabahce Palace is adorned with exquisitely crafted furnishing and ornaments, mostly from Europe. The centerpiece of the ceremonial hall is the world's largest Bohemian crystal chandelier, a gift from Queen Victoria of Great Britain. It dominates the room, a symbol of the influence of European powers at the very heart of the Ottoman administration. But Westernization had been a very expensive process.
Dolmabahce Palace is a palace that speaks of power, of flaunting power. It's really the embodiment of a modern empire, or an empire that is trying to modernize. And of course, there's a cost to that. There's a price to pay, and that price is the debt, the Ottoman debt, which starts in the 1850s, more or less, with the palace. And the palace is just one drop in that enormous debt that will eventually force the empire into a formal bankruptcy in 1875.
Political reform was desperately needed if the empire was to have any hope of a future. In this room in 1876, the first Ottoman parliament was announced with great fanfare. But even this was not enough to keep the empire together. Although the Ottomans continued to modernize, once the economic and political axis of the world tilted west, it heralded the beginning of the end of Ottoman supremacy. But there was one final attempt to bring together the Muslim majority of the empire. A forgotten rail yard just south of Damascus. Once, this was one of the major stopping points on the pilgrimage route to Mecca. These decommissioned old locomotives bear silent witness to an important piece of Middle Eastern history. The Hejaz Railway, developed and constructed under the last Ottoman Sultan, Abdul Hamid II. The railway followed the ancient trail of camel caravans, and it slashed the arduous journey time from 40 days to 4 days. The route passed via Damascus and eventually terminated in Medina.
Sultans and caliphs throughout the history of Muslim civilization had to protect the pilgrimage yearly trip. It was the legitimizing feature of their rule. If they protected the pilgrims, they protected the holy cities, then they were good Muslim rulers. And so what Sultan Abdul Hamid did was link this sacred right with modern industry.
It brought much-needed innovation to the region and strengthened the Ottoman connection with key Islamic territories at a time of unrest. The railway was the embodiment of the Sultan's plan for Islamic union, bringing together Muslims not just within the empire, but beyond. 1,000 miles of track was laid across pitiless desert deep into the heart of Arabia and across the mountains of Hejaz. It brought together conscripts from Turkey, steel from Belgium, engineers and technology from Germany.
Sultan Abdul Hamid brought in European industrial expertise. German industry was extremely active in the construction of this railway. Over here we have an indicator, the German plaque and an Arabic plaque, so a collaboration of Ottoman and German enterprises.
But the Ottoman Empire was in debt, and the Hejaz project seemed an impossible dream. Yet remarkably, nearly a third of the cost of this vast public project was met by charitable donations. When the railway line had opened for business in 1908, it transported thousands of pilgrims. But the railway also became a target. During World War I, the Hejaz route was irrevocably damaged by Allied attacks. The Hejaz project had been an important achievement for the Islamic world, but it couldn't stem the tide of change. At its peak, the Ottoman Empire had stretched from Algiers to Mosul, and from Medina and the southern Arabian Peninsula to the gates of Vienna. They had commanded and preserved the most dynamic region in the world, and created a system of government that had allowed different religions and peoples to flourish. But crippled by civil strife and saddled with debt, the problems facing the empire became insurmountable. In the years following World War I, it was partitioned by the Allies, and in 1923, it was finally dissolved. The story of one of the largest and longest-lasting empires in the world came to an end.